You may have heard the name Lemuel Haynes before. He's known as the Black Puritan. It's an American cat in the 18th century. And he was, in 1828, when he was towards the end of his life, he was a well-respected old minister in New England. Andrew Jackson had just been elected to the presidency, and he was not feeling Andrew Jackson. But anyway, he was at a hotel at the time, and he stumbled into a ballroom where they were celebrating Andrew Jackson's presidency. So some of the guys knew him and called him over, Reverend Haynes, and they asked him to give a toast to Andrew Jackson. So somebody gave him a glass, and he lifted it, and he said to Andrew Jackson, Psalm 109, verse 8. And everyone lifted their glass, cheers, everyone drank. Later, somebody looked up the verse, and it says, let his days be few, and let and let another take his office. So he wasn't digging him. Lemuel Haynes was not Andrew Jackson's only hater. Senator from New York, William Macy, also spoke out against his election to the presidency. And in doing so, coined a phrase that I've titled the sermon, to the victor go the spoils. It sounds like something like from ancient Rome, but it's actually from modern American politics. And what he means was, at the time, when someone would be elected, they would fire everybody in their cabinet and all in the federal positions, and they would hire their friends and their family and everyone to those offices. So what it meant there was, when you take the victory of the election, you get to put all your people in those positions. This was outlawed by an act that was later passed in Congress, so that now to be hired, technically, you have to merit the positions in the federal government. Anyway. To the victor go the spoils is a marvelous phrase. It captures for us the reality that the winner takes all. That's the way that life is. That's the way God's world so often is. And the stakes are extremely high in any battle that's worth fighting. And there's a reality of this reflected in chapter 18 today. Last week, David was victorious over the Philistine. Miraculous, impossible victory. In chapter 18 today, is going to recount all the spoils and the stuff and the benefits that David got because of that victory. There's sort of an irony here too, because instead of getting rid of all Saul's people, David's going to bless, and all of Saul's people are going to work with him. So we'll see that as we go. But to the victor go the spoils. So on that note, there'll be 3 points to the sermon today. First, the spoil of friendship that David got with Saul's firstborn son Jonathan. Second, the spoil of popularity, that the people sung David's praises and supported him fully in his military conquests. And then third, the spoil of marriage. He married the daughter of the king and became the king's son-in-law through that. So, spoil of friendship, spoil of popularity, spoil of marriage, and then we'll end with 4 brief applications. All right, the spoil of friendship. This is recounted just in the first 5 verses of the chapter. It's pretty sweet. So David standing in Saul's tent with the head of the Philistines. Israel's just won the marvelous victory, but standing next to Saul is his firstborn son, the heir to the throne, naturally speaking, Jonathan. Right? We've met Jonathan before. He's the one who went out on that side quest to defeat the Philistines and ate the honey, and his eyes were brightened. We've already remarked that there's a like-mindedness between these guys. They're thinking along the same lines as they're fighting the battles of the Lord. They're daring, they're brave, they're willing to roll the dice or put all their chips on Christ and His promises to them. And so the rowdy cat. So as David's standing there, Jonathan cannot believe this, and they're knit together in their hearts. They become besties that day. Let's just read the language again real quick. The soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Again, we're talking about the inner man. The Lord chose David, not because of what he looked like on the outside, but because what he was like on the inside. And him and Jonathan were the same on the inside. They had the same great faith in God. God who was mighty and could do anything. when they looked at a situation, God was everything to them in that. And they thought outside the box, and the possibilities in their minds were endless. They're thinking along the same lines, so they clicked immediately, both of them together. Saul, in the meantime, also hired David full-time. He's not running back and forth anymore. He's not just playing the harp and then running to shepherd the sheep. Now David's going to remain in the palace of Saul. Well, not very long actually, but he's hired full-time in. So Saul's still loving him at this point too. It says Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. So here is pictured a marvelous, wonderful thing. Friendship. This is a deep, there's a brotherhood type of joint here. The way that they were knit together. You know what it's like sometimes? It doesn't happen all the time. Sometimes you meet somebody and you just click. You think the same way. You see things the same way. You can finish each other's sentences. You build off and volley off one another. And that was Jonathan. And Jonathan and David were a nasty duo together. They were in league together. It says Jonathan made a covenant with them. So they bonded together to serve the Lord together. Why is this significant? Well, because Jonathan is the heir to the throne. Now God has already told Saul that he's out. And that the kingdom will be taken from him. He's still in possession of it technically, but it's going to pass away. Jonathan could very easily have seen David as a threat. Why not? He sees that he has an opportunity to be king, and now here's this other guy. He doesn't know he's been anointed king yet, but he sure is, this guy could be it. He feels like Balin when he saw Thorin Oakenshield on the battlefield. There is one I could follow. There is one I could call king. He felt like that. So the humility of Jonathan here is marvelous. Saul feels the opposite. Saul's jealous. Saul feels threatened, and he should in some ways. But again, God's mercy to Saul is great. The guy he sent to replace him loves Saul, wants to serve Saul. He's doing Saul good. You see the mercy of God there, the patience of God, the grace of God in choosing David for Saul. Anyway, Jonathan feels no such thing. So they're going to work together in league, and that's a great thing when you have it. Two heads are better than one, and that's what we're going to see in the life of David and Jonathan. So this is the first spoil that he gets from his great victory, is the king's son, the heir, his firstborn, is going to become best friends with him. That's a great blessing. God is enriching David now. Through his act of faith, through slaying the Philistine, God is giving him a worthy companionship and brotherhood here with Jonathan. So basically both rowdy cats brought the ruckus, and they felt that. So there was witness, and that's what they were. All right. Second, the spoil of popularity. In this section, actually in verse 5 here, it says that Saul said, after this, David's still playing the harp in the palace, but he's also now the commander of the men of war. And when Saul set David in command of the people, it says this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So everyone was feeling it. Everyone. It was a unanimous voice. The only person against David here is Saul himself. Everyone else is digging it. They're celebrating. They can recognize that this is God's man, that he sent them, someone to deliver them, someone to lead them, someone to set them free from the Philistines. And David's a godly cat. He's not shy about that. He's ascribing glory to the Lord every step of the way. So everyone's feeling that. But as they come home, they leave the tent, they pack up their things, they're marching in triumphant procession back to Jerusalem. And as they do that, the women of the place come out, and they're singing and dancing with their tambourines. And this was their song. Saul has struck down his thousands. And Saul was feeling that first part. That wasn't bad. It's pretty good pen work there. But then the second part, he couldn't believe it. And David has struck down his 10,000s. Ooh, that's not so good. So, are they purposely roasting Saul? I'm not sure about that, but he took it that way because of his mindset and the way he's seeing things. He's going to take. That's what happens when we become defensive, or let's call it narcissistic, and we become sensitive to our own image in that way. We're going to read everything in the worst possible light against us, That's definitely what Saul's doing here. But I mean, it's pretty comical though, the way they were busting out this song. So Saul doesn't like that too much. He's angry. And he's complaining about it. You know, you got to take that like a man. It's okay if it stings a little, but you can just take that. But instead, he's pouring out his heart to his servants. They've ascribed to David his 10,000s. Maybe he's talking to wifey about it. But to me, they've only ascribed thousands. It reminds me of the scene in Gladiator when Spaniard, Maximus, is fighting a seasoned gladiator. He's supposed to lose to him, but he beats him. But before killing him, he looks to Commodus, and Commodus gives him thumbs down to kill him. But Maximus does not kill the other gladiator. He defies the emperor, and then all the crowds start cheering, Maximus the Merciful, Maximus the Merciful. And then the next scene, Commodus is back in the palace, and they're calling him the Merciful. It's pretty similar vibe. So sort of thing has repeated itself in the annals of history, I guess. So anyway, David is the people's champ now. And everyone's feeling that as well. And then he has the spoil of marriage. So this is what was promised. Remember when David ran to the battlefield? He asked, what shall be done for the man who slays this uncircumcised Philistine? And they said, King Saul will enrich this man's house, his family will be free in Israel, and he'll give him his daughter to marry. So he married a king's daughter. And so Saul does this, but Saul has some ulterior motives here. He offers his oldest daughter, Merab, to David. Doesn't end up falling through, or doesn't end up going through. But Saul's got this plan in his mind. He thinks, okay, I'll give her to him, and I'm going to set him to fight all the Philistines, and the Philistines are going to do my work for me. Now, why is Saul saying this? Well, because there's a little section in here that we skipped where it shows them back at the palace, and Saul takes his first stab at killing David. So he's back at the palace. Verse 10, a harmful spirit from the Lord comes upon him. We covered this a couple weeks ago. This could either be a demonic spirit from God's presence to torture him, or could be God allowing Saul to go into a bad mind state. Again, I don't think Saul, personally, this is my opinion, I don't think Saul's possessed by a demon here, because he's rationalizing and thinking through all his techniques. He's conscious of his plans and plots, and it seems to me the Lord withdrew from Saul and allowed him to be tormented by the regret and bitterness and jealousy of what he had lost for his sin and before David. Anyway, David's playing the lyre because Saul's having one of his fits, whatever it is. And this time it's not really working. David's out of tune a little bit. You know what I'm saying? I don't know what happened. His fingers got messed up in the battle. He couldn't quite hit the notes right because it wasn't soothing Saul. And Saul's getting more upset than ever. He's got a spear in his hand, and he says to himself, I'll pin David to the wall. So hurls the spear at him. Apparently it happened more than once. And it says that David evaded him. So maybe he did a little spin move and got out of the way. So ran out twice and was not able to pin him to the wall. This is, as I said, the first attempt on David's life. The first of many from Saul. So the second one then is when he offers his daughter Merab to him, and he thinks, I'm just going to send David out against the Philistines and they'll take care of him. Eventually he's going to slip, a stray arrow, something's going to happen, and I'm not going to have to worry about David because he's going to be dead. So I'll just let the Philistines do it. Again, the calculation and the cool, cold reasoning of that, leads me to believe that Saul's just in an embittered, revengeful state that God has put him in because he's withdrawn his spirit from him. So he says that, but when it's time to marry Merab, she's been given to another man. Why is that? Well, that's because David was taking his sweet time. David was not too excited about this. If somebody came up to you and said, "Yeah, you're single, you want to marry the daughter of the king. I'm going to marry a princess." That sounds like a great idea. David is not very forward about this. We see again David's humility here. This is the cat that slayed the giant. This is the hero. But yet when he's offered the king's daughter to marry, he doesn't want to do that. He sees himself as unworthy. Who am I, he says. David has talked like this before. He's really a humble cat, actually. That was Psalm 8. When I consider the heavens, the stars that you've made, the work of your fingers, what is man that you're mindful of him? Now, David's not just thinking of just random people. He's primarily thinking of himself there. Who am I that you would take notice of me, the God of the universe? It's a similar vibe here when he's offered the daughter of the king. Who am I? And who's my relatives? My father's house. We're least in Israel. We're poor in Israel. Who am I that I should be son-in-law to the king? So he's resistant of it. He's resistant. He's humble. He doesn't see that he's worthy of these things. He doesn't want to be that guy. And so often, when God calls somebody to fill that type of role, the worthy person, the person that's truly called, is often the person that doesn't want anything to do with it. Did not want to do this. He was happy to live a quiet life, but God had other plans. Anyway, okay, that didn't work. But Saul's got another daughter, Michal, and she's digging David. She's feeling it. So it's like, Saul's like, this is great. Saul's pleased about this, not because he thinks it'll be a happy marriage, not because he loves David and wants to honor him. He doesn't want it's nothing to do with that. He says in verse 21, let me give her to him that she may be a snare for him. A snare. Now, Saul's really talking like a king now. This is how kings are supposed to think in the world, is the political alliances and the marriages and using your own family and your own daughters often to try to win political alliances or advance your own domain or whatever. He's really thinking like a worldly king now. They got their wishes in Israel because he is truly a king like all the other nations. So he's willing to give away his daughter here that she might be a snare. Maybe Michal was the more annoying one. I'm not really sure. I mean, it doesn't, she ends up turning against David, so maybe she wasn't the sweetest one. For whatever reason, Saul thought she could really trip him up. And, of course, let the hand of the Philistines be against him. And so he wants him to marry. David again says no. The servants try to persuade him. He said, do you have any idea what kind of thing it is to become the king? You think it's a little thing to become the king's son-in-law? He doesn't want nothing to do with that. But they come back to him and they say, okay, how about this? You can't afford a bride price. You can't give the 10 cows or whatever the bride price is. So I'll tell you what, Saul says. If you can bring me 100 foreskins of uncircumcised Philistines, then that will be the bride price. All right. Now, Saul's whole technique here is to get David, he wants him to die. You got to kill 100 of these guys, take the foreskins. It's not going to be quite so easy, maybe, to do that. So he's thinking to make him trip about it. When David hears it, however, David feels it. It's juice to his faith. When they say it to him, verse 26, it pleased David well when he heard this. So that's another insight into David's heart. He's humble, he's lowly, but he's also rowdy. He's feeling it. He's God's warrior. He knows it. He likes to swing the sword in the cause of the Lord, in righteous cause. He likes to use his giftings to run the course of a mighty man. He's feeling that. To this, finally, it's agreeable now. He feels like it's just being handed to him, but here's something he can actually win and achieve. So he goes out and brings back 200 of them joints. That's not, look man, I'm not even trying to picture that's some nasty business, but he brought the sack with all the foreskins. All right, there it is. He did it. He doubled the price with great success. And Saul didn't expect that. Every step along the way, David's just becoming greater. He's advancing. He's having more wisdom, more victory, more success. Why? It just says it again and again in this chapter, because the Lord was with him. That was the key to David's success. He's not, David's a weak man, we're going to see. He's not a perfect guy. It's not about David. That's what they've been trying to tell us. It's about the Lord. The Lord's with David. And if the Lord so chooses to do X, Y, and Z with you or me or whatever, calls you to this task or down that difficult road or whatever it may be, there will be great success if he is with you. The Lord is with David. And so he's opening up every door along the way. And it doesn't mean David's life's easy. It's not. We're going to see David's difficult life, and yet a successful life before God. So it backfires. Everything's backfiring against Saul. So he brings the foreskins, gets Michal, marries her. Michal loves him, and now it says that Saul's just basically terrified of David. He sees him as a threat, as an enemy, as someone who's against him. Saul's heart is filled with rage, bitterness, envy, and jealousy, and he's being governed by those things. And this is how the Lord gave Saul over to his sin. And the chapter ends with the growth of David. As often as the Philistines came out, David had more success than all the other soldiers and servants of Saul, and his name was highly esteemed. People say here, the name of David being spread far and wide. Okay, that's the chapter. The spoil of friendship, the spoil of popularity, the spoil of marriage. And also the beginnings of Saul's pursuit of David to take his life, which continues on as we move forward in the book. All right, let's end, though, with 4 applications of how this may apply to us here this morning. First application from Saul, lest we judge over Saul, let's be humble here. Let us watch in our own lives against the sin of jealousy and envy. Jealousy and envy. In the Proverbs, David's son Solomon says, "Who can stand before jealousy?" Anger, you might be able to deal with rage, that's okay. But jealousy is an overwhelming flood of wrath, fury, and fire, and no one can stand before jealousy. There's good jealousy. The Lord is jealous in a righteous way. Praise God for that. He cares what we do. He cares what we give ourselves to. He's our God. He made us. And he knows who he is. And so he's jealous over us. That's righteous. We can be jealous in righteous ways too. Husbands and wives ought to be jealous over one another. Not controlling in a suspectful, suspicious way, but jealous in a rightful way of saying, this is, you're mine, she's mine, he's mine, and that's that. Step off. That's good. We should feel like that way, even as parents. And there should be a jealousy in any role or position we have in life. We should stand on our square and represent it and not let somebody else take it if that's where God has appointed us to be. There's good things there. But most of our jealousy, let's be honest, is probably not righteous. We're easily swept away by jealousy and envy. You could be perfectly happy in whatever you have going for you, but then you see someone else has something else, and all of a sudden, this thing that was good enough for you just a second ago is no longer enough. Why? Because of jealousy and envy. I mean, this sin made it's one of the 10. You shall not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor that is not yours. The sin of jealousy and envy. Saul was inflamed with this sin. It was governing his every thought, his every move. He was calculating not bad. It's not quite checkers, it's kind of chess level. He's thinking ahead a few moves at least. And why? Where's all the energy and focus coming from? Jealousy. He can't stand to see David have all these things that he wants for himself. Remember when Saul disobeyed God and offered the sacrifice? When he did that, and when they didn't, and they also didn't slaughter all the Amalekites, Saul didn't think that was a big deal. He didn't quite realize what he was losing, but now he realizes everything that had been taken from him. He sees in David now what ought to be his, what could have been his. And he's raging against it. Like Boromir, I guess, trying to take the ring. It's just completely taken him over. Let us be careful, beloved. Let us be careful. And usually you'll feel jealousy for those who are closer to you. It's easy. You can envy the wicked. That happens. Let us be careful not to be jealous over the wicked and their seeming success and their ease of life, and they have everything they've ever dreamed of. Read Psalm 73 about that one. I mean, it's easy to fall into that. But I think it's even easier to fall into little jealousies, even between believers. If something goes well for one of us. If Zach Coddington's album goes double platinum, Christian hip hop, just don't hate on him. That's all I'm saying. But that's easy. So let's just be aware of it. Be humble about it. God will help us. And how can we do it? For praying for one another, encouraging one another. When any believer shares in some success, we all do. The same team. So, yes, all right, cool. Let's watch against that sin. Second application. Christian friendship is a precious gift. We see this modeled in the life of David and Jonathan. They're close friends. I think men have trouble with this. I think women have trouble with this too, though. Let's be honest. I think it's difficult to be a grown-up and have close friends. Acquaintances is good. We want that. But to have a closer-knit friends, people that you call upon, people that you get their opinion on stuff, people that are just near and dear to you, that's a rarer thing. Why? It can be difficult. It requires effort. You know, it requires vulnerability to really pursue that and foster good friendship. But wherever God gives that to us, let's steward that. That's a precious thing. If there are believers in your life that you're like-minded with, you just jive with them. That's good. That should be pursued. To hang out, spend more time together, pray for one another, foster those friendships. Those are great things. And God will provide those for us. Both men and women, you know, as Christians, adults, we need that. It's easier when you're a kid maybe to have friends. For some reason when we're adults, I'm sure there's studies on this, why this is the case. But when God gives this to us, it's a blessing. It's worth more than anything else, really. What price could you put on having a group of close and good friends? I mean, as I grow older, that's worth more to me than almost anything. You can't buy that. You know what I'm saying? So may God bless that. Jesus promised along these lines when the disciples asked, you know, we left lands and mother and father and houses for you. What shall we get? And Jesus said, you will get 100-fold in this life. Yes. Mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and lands. What he means is, when you become a Christian, you're part of something much bigger. And what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. That's the true Christian spirit there. And then that's most exemplified also in Christian friendships. So pursue those and steward those well. If that's not something you have, pray for that. God will bless you with that. I believe that. So it's a good thing. Third application. Turning now to consider Christ, the way that David also is showcasing and foreshadowing Christ here. Is that having to do with his popularity. So third application is public opinion goes up and down. It always does that. However, God's king is popular. He is popular. We see this in David here. Now, the public opinion may turn against David, and David's going to commit some terrible sins that will ruin the rest of his life in many ways. He's not going to enjoy that outward thing. But at this time, he enjoys the public opinion of God's people, of the population, and that's good. It's a good thing. That's as it should be. When Jesus came and ministered, he enjoyed the same thing. He was extremely popular. Not with the gatekeepers, those who had the keys of knowledge, and the supposed experts, but he was popular with ordinary people, regular people. The same thing with David here. All the people can dig David. They're catching the vibe, and then they're feeling it. It's all good. So they can recognize that. You know what I'm saying? Do we see this in the life of Christ as well? That in his ministry he was popular. Not popular with everybody. Saul's trying to kill him. We just had in our scripture reading from Matthew, Jesus began his life. They were trying to kill him. From the time he was born, Jesus' life was sought by Herod. So it's the same thing with David here. He's going to be persecuted, but by and large, the people like him. That's true, beloved. When we think about Christianity and we think about the success of the gospel, it's easy to think that the gospel is losing in the world. In many ways, the gospel is being rejected every day. And what Jesus said is true, that the path is narrow. That's true. But on a global scale and on a historical scale, we still have to stand in awe of the immense popularity of Jesus Christ, God's King. Jesus is popular, even among unbelievers. People know about Jesus. Not everyone everywhere, and that's why when missions comes into play. But people know about Christ. People use the imagery, even people who reject him. You can't help but dig Christ. You can't. Even on a natural level. Of course, you reject him because of sin, yes. But there's a truth there about the popularity of Christ. So what does that mean? That means as we go forth as Jesus' representatives, he's the king of the universe for real, and we ought to expect success as we represent him. Success. As the gospel goes forth, and as our lives, hopefully just little bits, and we're struggling along, but maybe adorning the gospel a little bit, there's a little bit of fragrance of Christ on our lives. As that spreads forward, we should not be surprised if people are turned to him. I think it can be an attack on our faith as Christians when we expect failure for the gospel. And there's something to be said about the popularity of Jesus Christ and the popularity to come when every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that he is Lord. So let's remember that as well. Fourth application, and we're through. Everything turned against God's king only works for him. Everything that Saul launches at David only blesses David and advances David and exalts him and showcases more of God's power on his life. There's nothing that Saul can do to harm. The best thing Saul could do is chill and stop throwing stuff at him, because it's all being used for blessing. That's true of Christ. Everything used against Christ in his life turned into blessing. That crescendo's in the gospel, on the cross. They hatched the plot against his life, and they succeeded. They nailed him to the cross. They killed him. And that very thing was his highest achievement and victory when he died for sins and rose again, conquering as the second Adam and became the ruler of God's universe. It's amazing. So that is also reflected in our lives. There's nothing that Satan can throw at us. The only thing that can take us out is our sin. But there's no suffering, there's no persecution, there's no trial or difficulty in your life that God won't turn towards good in his purpose and plan. That's the genius of it. You can't beat God. Everything is turned to blessing and goodness in our lives. So let's not shy away from trials and struggles and difficulties in our lives. Rather, let's lean into them, expecting God to do above and beyond what we can ask or think with them, and get glory for himself, glory for his Christ, and goodness for us in all those things. You just can't beat God. So that's what we see on display here. So let's take these things and place our trust in Jesus once again today. He's amazing. He's worthy of our adoration. He's worthy of our songs of praise. He's worthy of our devotion. He's worthy of our celebration. And he's worthy that we brag about him. So let's do that. All right, let's pray. Father, bless these truths to us. And may Jesus be on display here in the life of David and in our own lives. We pray in his name with confidence. Amen.